Welcome back, everybody, to the Miami Marlins franchise here on MLB The Show 23. Today's episode is a pretty fun one. We've got the 2024 MLB Draft. We've done a lot of work on these prospects in what is expected to be a really fun draft class of players. Last episode, we had a whole draft preview, so if you'd like to check that out and get some context before we get started here today, I will leave a card at the top right of your screen for you to go ahead and check out. This is a very unique group of players. There's a lot of older prospects at the top of this draft, but there's some intriguing 18-year-olds as well, and a lot of guys who could be in play for Miami's top selection at number 11 overall. The Marlins have 2 second-round picks as well and 4 selections overall in the top 100, so we've got plenty of ammo to do some damage. We had a phenomenal draft last year. Obviously, Woody Landry in the first round so far has been a home run. He's been the best hitter in minor league baseball and has climbed all the way to the number 2 prospect in all of baseball. Robbie Jones, our second-round pick, has climbed all the way up to 18th. He has been fantastic as well in Double-A with an ERA lower than 2.8 and a whip barely above 1. We had plenty of other talented players who we drafted as well, and I think it's going to be really hard to top last year's group with multiple A potentials and a bunch of guys who I think will be major league contributors. But hopefully we can get some more guys to add to the farm system here today in the 2024 draft. Assuming all of the super highly projected players are gone by pick 11, I think the Marlins have a good understanding of which players will be on the board for them, and I think they've got a lot of good candidates. I think Reggie Weller, Carmen A. Casto, Augustin De La Cruz, Ronald Landino, and Luis Trevino are all in play for pick 11, and I think Rodney Dunbar could be a wild card with that selection as well. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get this show on the road. The 2024 MLB Draft is now officially open, and the Washington Nationals are on the clock with the number 1 pick. The Nationals drafted a generational prospect last year with outfielder Justin Kramer, so we'll see who joins him. With the first pick, the Washington Nationals select starting pitcher Giovanni Baker. He's a high school prospect projected as the 9th pick. We did not do a ton of work on him. I did not think he was going to go number 1. Really, I didn't think he was going to go in the top 5. I thought he would have gone more towards Miami's range, but clearly this is a player the Nationals like. And I guess they'd rather go for a slightly lower projected player who might be asking for less bonus so they can work with more bonus allotment money throughout the draft. With the second pick, the Detroit Tigers select starting pitching prospect Mariano Rosas from East Carolina University. He hails from Panama. Rosas is the most safe prospect in this draft. High floor, yet high ceiling. The one issue is that he opted out of his medical exam, and he's already 23 years old. This is kind of similar to the Tigers picking Casey Mize number 1 overall in the sense that he's an experienced college pitcher who has a high floor, and ironically, Mize has dealt with injury issues throughout his career. So the Tigers are certainly hoping that Rosas does not get hit with the same plague. That'll bring us to the Oakland Athletics with the 3rd pick in the draft, and they will continue the trend of starting pitching as they select 6'5" Esteban Espinosa, the 18-year-old from Ohio. This is somebody who I thought would be in play for the Marlins later in the draft. He was projected to be the 70th overall pick, right in line for Miami's 3rd round selection. Instead, he's the 3rd overall pick of the draft. While I think he's a lot better than his projection suggests, this is obviously a major surprise. I did not see him going anywhere near the top 3 over some of the other prospects in the draft. So we'll go a little bit faster here leading up to Miami's selection at number 11. All starting pitchers at the top of this draft with some surprises. Giovanni Baker, number 1. Espinosa, 3rd. The Giants, who jumped up in the draft lottery, select outfielder Josh Serrano from Arizona State, the number 1 projected pick in the draft. The Baltimore Orioles select Carlos Guerrero, a starting pitcher who our scouts did not like at all. They think he's going to be good right off the bat, but the ceiling is strongly capped off. Earl Berman from Baylor is the 6th pick to the Pirates. As I mentioned, the top of this draft is filled with college prospects, and so far we've had 4 go in the top 6. The Reds pick first baseman Sean Paulson. I thought he would have been more like the 3rd player in his position off the board, but instead he's the 1st one, and he goes in the top 10. The Kansas City Royals select 3rd baseman Augustin De La Cruz, the most talented offensive player in this draft. Not only was De La Cruz one of our main targets for the 11th pick, but he was my number one player on the board, period. If we had had the number one pick, he would have been the selection for me. I think he's the best prospect in this draft. He's so advanced offensively, and I still think there's a lot of room to grow. I feel like it still would have been a little bit irresponsible for us to pick Gus because he has no value defensively, so maybe it's for the better that I can't tempt myself with picking him. So with that, our number one player is off the board before we even get to pick. The Colorado Rockies at 9 select starting pitcher Phil Weber, another player who our scouts were not overly high on. And then at pick 10, the Boston Red Sox select catcher Carmen Castro. Catcher is definitely not a need for us, but I think he is talented enough to where he would have absolutely been in play here with the 11th pick in the draft. So with that, the Miami Marlins are on the clock. The board did not exactly play out how I expected or wanted. It kind of sucks that you can't trade picks in baseball because it would be nice to move this pick, whether that would be with a trade up or a trade down. But we've got to deal with the cards that we have been dealt with, and hopefully we'll be able to make the most out of our hand. We still got a lot of good choices, though. Even with Gus De La Cruz off the board, I still think there's a lot of good options with him now gone. Carmen Castro, again, another player we would have considered with this selection, but again, catcher's not really a big need for us. So I think it really comes down to 4 players. We'll start with Reggie Weller, the left-handed starting pitcher. I think Weller's a good prospect. He throws super hard. He strikes out batters at an elite rate. He's got better swing and miss stuff than any pitcher in this draft. The problem is the walks per 9 really concerns me. That's a very important attribute in this game, and that's an area he really struggles in. Shortstop Ronald Andino is also in play as well. He did opt out of his physical exam, which is certainly not ideal. Andino is not a great offensive prospect, but defensively he is a wizard. This is somebody who I think can win gold gloves at the shortstop position. He has versatility and can play everywhere on the diamond, but I think he's got the range and glove to be able to stick it short. The outfielder, Luis Trevino, might be the most well-rounded player of the group. He doesn't have many skills where he really specializes in, but he's an all-around good hitter. He hits from both sides of the plate and is decent enough defensively. Rodney Dunbar is the wild card here. Our scouts think he's the second best player in the entire draft. His walks per 9 is his best asset, which I think is a really big deal, and I think all around he's really good. So with the 11th pick in the 2024 MLB draft, the Miami Marlins select shortstop Ronald Andino from Puerto Rico. Obviously, the board did not play out how we had hoped or expected, but when life gives you lemons, you gotta make some lemonade, and I think Ronald Andino is gonna be a great cup of lemonade. Defensively, he is the best prospect, not just in this draft, but maybe the best defensive prospect I've ever seen. This is somebody who has the chance to be a gold glove level defender very early on in his career. He did opt out of his physical exam, which is a little bit of a concern, but as far as our team and scouts know, there are no major medical issues with Andino at this current moment. I think this is somebody who can absolutely be the shortstop of the future, and when you're looking for someone at the shortstop position, defense and speed has to be a priority. Yes, hitting the ball is nice, but you need somebody who can field consistently, which is something we've really lacked at the shortstop position throughout this series. Again, his glove is fantastic. His arm is fantastic. There are no questions about him defensively. He is the perfect defensive prospect. He is very fast as well. He's got track speed. Now, offensively, he's got a lot of work to do, but I do think he has an intriguing power tool. His contact isn't great. His plate skills are not great, but I think there's something to work with offensively, and that's what puts him above the other prospects. His defense is great, and his offense is an intriguing work in progress. So Ronald Andino is our selection at number 11 overall. I'm really happy with him as a player, and I'm excited to have him in the building. Chris Lockwood is the 12th pick to the Brewers. Reggie Weller, 13th to the Diamondbacks. He's really good. If his walks per 9 was adequate, I honestly would have picked him, but the walks per 9 was just such a concern for me. Eric Espinoza to the Mets. Lamar Ash to the Mariners. I thought he'd be in play for Miami's second pick, but I guess not. Bobby Horner, a starting pitcher, goes to the Los Angeles Angels. The Rays select catcher Steven Ryu, a player who looks to be a major bust. You would have thought the Rays of all teams would avoid the bust. Luis Trevino ends up going to the Chicago White Sox at 18. Again, I think he's good, but Andino's just a little bit better for me. Peter Vera is the 19th pick to the Yankees. Daisuke Fon goes 20th to the Padres. He also looks to be a major bust. Kyle Brown goes in the first round. Wow. Another guy who was in play later in the draft for the Marlins. Orlando Beck goes to the St. Louis Cardinals. Andreas Espinoza, the second best shortstop in this draft, ends up in Texas. Catcher Kevin Preston, a lot earlier than we could have expected, to the Chicago Cubs. An outfielder, Buster Payton, goes to the Toronto Blue Jays, somebody who should be pretty ready for an 18-year-old. Mike Gonzalez, first baseman to the Braves. That is a steal by Atlanta. He is one of the best hitters in this draft. Third baseman Matt Willard to the Phillies. Second baseman Rod King to the Houston Astros. And then the two World Series teams are left. We've got the Dodgers, who go third baseman Nathan Carter. And then the defending champion Cleveland Guardians pick starting pitcher Pedro Prado. The Guardians have the very next pick, and they select Rodney Dunbar, the pitcher who we considered he would have definitely been the number one player on our board going into the second round, but I never really thought he would fall to our second pick. I honestly thought he would go in the first round. So the fact that he did not go within the top 30 picks kind of suggests to me that our scouting department was higher on Dunbar than everybody else. So maybe he really isn't the second best player in this draft. We're now getting pretty close to our second pick at number 46 overall. A number of teams do not have their second round picks because they signed free agents with qualifying offers. This does not apply to us. We still have our own draft pick. So we're getting really close now, only around 5 or 6 picks away. A lot of the relievers are starting to go off the board here early in this round. Now we've got a starter with Dal Rousseau, the Pittsburgh Pirates, who ended up selecting Giovanni Simone, who was projected as a top 10 pick. All these relievers going off the board is good news for us because I don't think we would have really considered a reliever this early in the draft. Obviously, it's important to have a good bullpen, but I think the positional value with a reliever here would not be a very good selection. Only one more team ahead of us, that is the Boston Red Sox, and they go with second baseman Cesar Guevara, a player very high on our board. We really wanted him, but instead he makes it here earlier than expected to the Red Sox. So we've still got some really good players here. Orville Morton and Hitoki Nomo are both top 10 players in this draft according to our scouts. So realistically, it's going to be one of those two guys here. There are some other good options with some of the pitchers down the board, but it really comes down to Morton or Nomo. Both of them are very interesting players. They both opted out of their physical exams, which is a question mark for sure. We scouted Morton pretty much all the way. He's got a pretty high floor for an 18-year-old. Pretty good ceiling as well. Now, he's going to be raw right off the bat, but he's got good contact, speed, and arm strength. His power and his glove leave a little bit to be desired, but I think he could be an intriguing bat at the top of the lineup in the corner outfield. The only other player who we scouted at least 95% with was Ronald Andino, who we picked in the first round. Then there's Hitoki Nomo, who we only scouted to 45%, but I think he's got a sky-high ceiling, maybe higher than any pitcher in the entire draft. His walks per nine is his best per nine attribute, which is a big deal. His other per nines, minus his home runs per nine, do look pretty good, though. So which one is it going to be? With the 46th pick in the 2024 MLB Draft, the Miami Marlins select Hitoki Nomo, a left-handed pitcher from Japan. So the Marlins are going to look to bolster the pitching staff with Hitoki Nomo. He's a little bit of a risk, but the upside with him is clear. This is somebody who could absolutely outperform his draft slot if he can live up to expectations. Nomo does not come in with super nasty stuff. He doesn't throw ridiculously hard. He doesn't have nasty spin or a nasty breaking ball. But he's all around really solid for his age. His walks per nine is his best per nine attribute. And again, that's a really big deal for me. You've got to have good walks per nine. That's why the Marlins really liked Robbie Jones last year in the second round. And so far, he's been fantastic. Nomo does not allow too many hits per 9 innings. His strikeout rate is pretty good as well. And I think his overall upside is what gives him the edge for me over Orville Morton. So let's go through the rest of the second round pretty quickly. None of the other players we're really eyeing up went in the second round, which is certainly good news for us. Derek Higgins was a guy we were kind of considering later in the draft. He ends up going here to the Angels. Keep in mind, we pick pretty soon with a selection in the competitive balance round B. We're only about 5 picks away now. All the guys we want are still on the board, but unfortunately the Mariners would select Orville Morton, the outfielder. I did not think he was going to fall this far. He would have been an easy selection for us. And then the very next player on our board, Rafael Ochoa, goes with the very next pick to Tampa Bay. The fact that these two guys fell this far does kind of suggest to me that we were a lot higher on them than the rest of the league, but it is still unfortunate because I would have picked one of those two guys here at 71. So now we have to scramble a little bit because I kind of thought as we were getting closer one of those two guys would fall to us, and unfortunately neither of them do. So do we go with one of the pitchers who our scouts are high on, or do we kind of pull out a surprise and go in another direction? All of these pitchers are pretty intriguing, but none of them are supposed to go anytime soon, and we pick again pretty soon at number 84, so we can wait a little bit and still get some of these pitchers. We can always take a shot in the dark on a position player who we don't think is going to fall to our selection. So we've got a number of options here with this 71st pick, so who's it going to be? With the 71st pick in the 2024 MLB Draft, the Miami Marlins select first baseman Ryan Poles from Hofstra University. This is a player we have not talked about at all. We have not scouted him at all. But since he's 22 years old, we do have a pretty good idea of what his potential and overall is going to be. When you look at his potential, you might be a little bit confused why we're looking at him here, because his potential is probably going to end up being a C, most likely. So why exactly is Ryan Poles a player we like? Look at his hitting stats. This guy rakes. Will he ever be a full-time starter at the big league level? I'm not sure, but to get a legitimate A-level hitting prospect basically in the 3rd round, in my opinion, is a total steal. He has raked over the last few years at Hofstra. Yes, he's not playing against the best competition, but even so, his offensive numbers are among the best in college baseball. Defensively, I don't think he's too bad. He is a first baseman, and obviously we do have Woody Landry, but I do think he's good enough defensively to maybe play one of the corner outfield spots. I think his arm might be good enough to play third base. So we're just going for offense here. There are not many better offensive players in the entire draft, certainly none on the board. So I think getting a guy like Ryan Poles, who's going to be able to hit the ball at the big league level pretty early on, is a good pick for us. As we continue to go down the board, a lot of the position players who I had kind of considered taking a shot in the dark with ended up going before our 84th pick. So I think we made the right decision by going with Ryan Poles. One of the pitchers our scouts were very high on, Carlos Ramirez, goes a few picks before us to the Rockies. I'm really not that sold on Ramirez, to be honest. His walks per 9 is dreadful. He's super raw. I don't think we're really missing out by not getting him. He would have been in play here at pick 84, but there are still good options in terms of the pitchers, and there are still some intriguing position players we could look at. As we look at Ramirez here, yes, his potential is high, but even though he's ranked 37th by our scouts, I just really don't see it with him. I think some of these other pitchers still on the board are a little bit better. I think both Steven Elez and Juan Diaz-Mil are a lot more polished, and even going down the board, somebody like Derek Spaldings or Johnny Lundy would probably be a better pick here, in my opinion, than Ramirez. So with the 84th pick in the 2024 MLB Draft, the Miami Marlins select Steven Elez, an 18-year-old right-handed starting pitcher from North Carolina. So Elez will be the selection here. He was not projected to go for a while, but I think he's by far the best pitcher left, in my opinion. So I'm going to pick him here. He really does not have a whole lot of question marks compared to some of these other pitchers who either did not take their physical or failed it altogether. So the fact that Elez is healthy is already a leg up. I think he's super polished as well. His stock has really risen for us ever since we saw him at the Under Armour All-American game at Wrigley Field. His two best per 9 attributes are his hits per 9 and his walks per 9, which in my opinion are the two most important. His strikeouts per 9 is also pretty good, and he throws decently hard. The only thing with him is he allows the lawn ball a little bit too much, similarly to Hitoki Nomo, who we drafted in the 2nd round. So hopefully both of those guys can really improve in that area together. Making our way to the end of the 3rd round, not many of the pitchers who we were eyeing up got picked. Lewis Roth, the outfielder, was a guy we were eyeing up. He goes to Cleveland at pick 100. Marco Duarte to Washington. He was another guy we kind of eyed up a little bit. But for the most part, a lot of the players who we had on our radar did not go in between our 3rd and 4th round selections. So that'll bring us to pick 114. Most of the pitchers, Diaz-Mil, Spalding, Lundy, all of these guys are still here. The value on paper with these guys is really good, but none of them are healthy. Other than Johnny Lundy, all the other pitchers we're looking at either opted out or failed their physical. I feel like pitchers nowadays have a harder time staying healthy, so I'd rather not get somebody who's behind the 8 ball in terms of their health. So with that being said, with the 114th pick in the 2024 MLB Draft, the Miami Marlins select Charles Harris, a right fielder from the Netherlands. The reason why we're picking Harris here is because I think we can wait on some of these pitchers, especially with the recent medical stuff that has come out about them. I'd rather get a prospect in Harris who I know is going to have pretty good potential. He's a little bit more raw than you'd hope for somebody who's already 22 years old, but he's probably going to have B potential, and I think there's a lot to work with. He's got very intriguing physical skills. His two best traits are his speed and his arm strength. Those are two things you cannot teach. I think with his speed and his range, he very well could play center field in the future. Offensively, he's a work in progress, but I do think there is some upside. He's got a good mix of contact, power, and plate skills. But I think offense right now is his worst area with his blazing speed and his great arm. If he can improve his bat, though, along with his glove, I think we could be looking at a really good player. And it's also worth noting that he is the second cousin of Robbie Jones, our second-round pick last year. So as we go forward now, some more of the guys we were looking at, like Donnie Seavers, are going, one of the pitchers. The Astros draft Ton Sasaki. He looks a whole lot like the guy from Sausage Party. Outside of Donnie Seavers, none of the other pitchers we were looking at got drafted in the 4th round. It seems like all these teams are scared about the medical, just like us. So now we're going into the 5th round. John Kennedy is the top pick to the Washington Nationals. The previous John Kennedy to be employed in Washington, D.C. got shot. So hopefully this guy has a better future in the nation's capital. That'll bring us here to our selection. And again, none of these pitchers are getting drafted, so the medical continues to really scare these teams off. And we've got an interesting dilemma of, do we take the risk and pick one of these guys now, or do we go in another direction, say like another position player? So with the 144th pick in the 5th round now of the 2024 MLB Draft, the Miami Marlins will select third baseman J.J. Cohen, an 18-year-old from Connecticut. I like the upside here with Cohen. Even though we've barely scouted him, his potential range is 65 to 99. So there is a chance we could get an absolute home run here. But the way I think about it is, if you average out those two numbers, 65 and 99, it's somewhere in the low 80s. So there's a high mathematical probability that we're drafting an 18-year-old position player with at least B potential. I like our odds there with Cohen, even though he is quite raw. I would have picked one of the pitchers, but again, the medical is really scaring me off. And the fact that other teams are passing on these guys as well really validates the fact that the medical is a clear issue with these players. So instead, we're going to go with Cohen, somebody who's certainly a work in progress. He's got a long ways to go, but at 18 years old, I think there's a lot of room to grow, with him being one of the youngest players in the draft. We got to look at him at the U.S. Under-18 Nationals. This is actually the only opportunity that we've gotten to watch him so far, and we actually came away quite impressed. We saw the upside offensively that he brings to the table. This is somebody who, if developed properly, could be a major league bat in a few years' time. I think he's got solid physical tools defensively, decent glove, decent arm. He doesn't really have any major weaknesses, which I think is a good sign for his development. If he can just continue to improve in every area of the game, then I think we could be looking at a total steal in the 5th round. I could have gone with Peter Perez as well, another position player, but he's older and he failed his physical. Again, the medical scares me off with some of these players. Juan Villasmil, the pitcher, ends up getting drafted by the Mets, so he is finally off the board. He failed his physical, and his fall comes to a close here in the 5th round. So now we will get into the 6th round. Other than Juan Villasmil, all of the other pitchers will still be on the board for us, along with the shortstop, Peter Perez. So we've still got a number of options with our final pick of the day. We've only drafted 2 pitchers so far, so we could very well go in that route again. Obviously, Villasmil being injured certainly worried me. There's only 2 starting pitchers left on the board, actually, and it's 2 players who we have looked at for a while, with Derek Spalding, who opted out, and Johnny Lundy, the one guy through this whole process who actually passed his physical. We could go for another high upside position player. We could go for a guy like Peter Perez, who we know is going to have a good potential rating, if nothing else. If we want to go for a different position player who's a little bit more experienced and we know is going to have good potential but is actually healthy, outfielder Von Montenegro could be a good option as well. So with the 174th pick in the 2024 MLB Draft, the Miami Marlins select Johnny Lundy, a left-handed starting pitcher from North Carolina. The difference between him and Spalding is, for one thing, Lundy's actually healthy, and two, his initial rating will probably be better. So I like Lundy a lot more, in my opinion, and I think this is really good value in the 6th round. In hindsight, we probably should not have waited this far to get him, but it really worked out because he slipped through the cracks. Unlike most of these pitchers, he passed his physical, which is a pretty big deal. We're getting somebody who's going to be able to play, and I think he'll be decently good right off the bat. We saw him at the Perfect Game All-American Showcase. He pitched 2 pretty good innings in San Diego. The one reservation I have about him right now is that his hits per 9 and walks per 9 are his 2 worst per 9 attributes. But in the 6th round, we're just looking for value, and I think he could be a steal. So looking at some of the other guys who we did think about here, the shortstop Peter Perez ended up going to the Arizona Diamondbacks with the 176th pick. He was projected to go 176. Our team ranked him 176, and sure enough, he ended up being pick 176. The pitcher, Derek Spalding, ended up not getting drafted, interestingly enough, as that wraps up round number 6, and that'll wrap up the entirety of the draft. A really fun one for us here. Even though we did not get lucky with Augustin De La Cruz getting drafted before us, I still think we made the most out of how the board played out, with Ronald Landino being our 1st round selection, Hitoki Nomo in the 2nd round. But look at the bottom of Nomo's player card. It says he's injured. When we drafted him, we knew he opted out of his exam, but apparently he must have just taken one and did not pass. That is worrisome. If I had known that he was injured, maybe we don't draft him, and that could affect if we sign him or not. Ryan Poles we got in the competitive balance round B. I really like his offensive skills. Steven Elez, the pitcher, in hindsight, maybe we could have waited a little bit more, but I do really like him. Charles Harris, the Dutch outfielder in the 4th round. I thought he was a good pick. J.J. Cohen, an intriguing shot in the dark who could have upside. And then Johnny Lundy in the 6th round I thought was a steal. Something I noticed with the players who did not pass their physical, who we passed on, like Juan Diaz-Mil and Peter Perez, after the draft, their projected ratings went down. So clearly their injuries will be affecting their overall ratings. I think we certainly would have drafted both of these players if not for them failing their physical. So that clearly scared us off, and it seems like our judgment in doing so was correct. For what it's worth, the pitcher that we drafted, Hitoki Nomo, who came out as injured, his ratings have not changed. So I think that's a good sign that it won't be a long-term thing, and more so it's a minor injury. But it could affect whether we sign him or not. And I would assume if we don't sign him, we would get a 2nd-round pick next year to make up for losing him, probably a compensatory selection. He's also not guaranteed a large sum of his bonus asking price. So that certainly puts a wrinkle into our signing plans of what we're going to do with him. And that'll certainly be a talking point as we go into these next couple of episodes trying to sign our draft picks. So that'll wrap up the episode. Certainly an interesting draft. I think this year was a lot harder than the first draft. We had a lot of easy picks in year 1. This year, not so much. And we had some challenges. We had some medical issues that steered us away from certain prospects. So that'll wrap up the episode. I hope you guys enjoyed nonetheless. Let me know what you thought of the draft down below in the comments. And make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out.